Hello everyone! It's been a short bit since I talked to you regarding my books. I've recently begun uploading the audiobooks for the 12 Monoliths books, and have started preparing to make more of them available, beginning with my first release book, Radical-9. While doing that, I had an idea. I make explain series detailing the lore and important story events of stories that I like. Why don't I do that with my own stories? I've already done an explain series on the 12 Monoliths ARG, which of course touches on the events of the books, but I can understand it can be daunting to get into a story with a reading list of all of these books. So I wanted to come in here and offer a shorter investment method to catch up on the stories of the Radical-9 Saga and the 12 Monoliths series. Now, I've uploaded a video that details my writing history along with a short synopsis of each book as they were written. It's available on my channel in the Lore and Story of playlist that this video is a part of, titled 11 Years of Being an Author. But this video is going to be something different. Today, we're going to be tackling the events of the Radical-9 Saga, the first ever set of books that I began to write, but we're going to be doing this in a chronological timeline versus a book-by-book basis. I'll be marking here which book the information is originally from, so it's clear which story we're talking about. With that said, let us begin by starting with the origin of everything. The Radical-9 series begins here. Humans have many names for the space where God resides across space and time, but for the purposes of this explanation, we will consider it the dimension between dimensions. Some call it the fulcrum of all reality, where multiple timelines are created and managed by an existence known as the pit. The dimension between dimensions acts as a vast ocean amidst multicolored space, where universes are interacted via large bubbles that house previews of their containers. What is the pit, you may ask? Well, inside the dimension between dimensions lies an abyss that extends as far as one could possibly imagine. Lining the walls of the pit are various slots meant to house human souls. Each slot is individualized for the lives the souls inhabit. You see, the origin of human souls is similarly the pit. From the pit, the souls are scattered far out into the various universes by way of the ocean currents of the dimension between dimensions. And the universes they land into, they are born into, becoming a person. Let's say we have Person A who is born into a universe. When Person A dies, their physical body dies, and returns to the Earth as one might normally think. But their soul is then called back to the dimension between dimensions. The soul is dragged up and breaks through the universal barrier, where it is cleaned of its memories and personality. It is here that those memories are fitted into one of the slots running down the walls of the pit. It is here where your traditional ideas of heaven or hell come from, as those memories then live out what would traditionally be considered an afterlife. This would mean that Person A, after their death, would be brought back to the pit, and then deposited into its records. And the soul that used to be Person A would then be sent out back into the ocean's currents, to then become Person B in some other new universe. And when they died, they would return to the pit and deposit the consciousness and memories, and then be sent out again to become Person C in another, yet new universe. This is the origin of life, and it has been running up to this point autonomously. Yet, for some unexplained reason, the pit sought further intervention, as certain futures seemed less certain as time moved forward. So, the pit had sent forth an avatar of itself, the Father, to be born unto the world as Friedrich Adada. We've got a little side tangent before we reach Friedrich, though, as first we're going to travel to one interesting universe we'll dub Universe A, in the year 1911. Jesse Anderson lived in the northern coasts of Weymouth, Massachusetts. His suffering began when he was just 5 years old. He was on a family trip with his father, Duncan, and his sister, Isadora, Isa for short. They had been a family that had an affection for the water. Duncan had taken his 2 children out on their modest boat one summer day, and had been on the path to being an extremely fortunate formative memory for the pair. But everything started when Isa had gotten her teddy bear taken by some seagulls who'd confused it for food. Jesse had stepped in and tried to get his sister's bear back, but they felt threatened at his approach and began to attack in return. Jesse was hospitalized after the gulls began pecking and slashing at his skin with their talons. They dislocated his eyeball from its socket and gouged big chunks out of his arm. Jesse remembered feeling every ounce of the pain. None of the medication worked. He started drifting out of his own head. He began to hear less and less, and soon his parents would visit his hospital room less and less. A few weeks later, he would become more lucid, but he had to agonize over the pain of his attack. He begged God to make the pain stop, and that he would give anything. This continued for the next 6 years as he was finally allowed to go home, but he grew despondent as God never responded to his pleas. His pain had barely subsided. He could still feel the singeing pain inside his head, and no matter how he had voiced his complaints, everyone else said he was fine. He thought different, but nobody believed him. Life meant very little outside of the pain he felt, and he thought things were going to remain this way. That is, until one day, not long after his 11th birthday, a rip in time appeared before him. It was a portal unlike anything he had ever seen, and from the depths of the rip in time came a voice. "You wish for mercy. Let's see if you're willing to earn your keep. I already know your worth. It's time to show your stuff." We're going to move ahead 3 years to 1920, and all the way across the planet in Germany. Otis Adada and Akira Namaguchi gave birth to a child they named Friedrich. This child was special in the fact that since his birth, he was blessed and cursed with foresight. He was connected to a higher plane of existence separate of all of reality. You will remember this as the dimension between dimensions I previously mentioned. Otis and Akira do not know this, of course, but the son they've just given birth to is the avatar of the pit's own machinations, dubbed the Father. The Father has existed since the beginning of time as an inner function within the pit. He is the distributor of souls into their various end places we mentioned previously. Friedrich is different than most people, as most souls when they are born to a universe are wiped clean of their previous existence. This did not happen with Friedrich, and so the knowledge of the future that the pit operates on, Friedrich had access to. It is with this knowledge that we then move forward to the months before the Second World War in 1939. Friedrich Adada, now 19, has knowledge of the oncoming war, and so chooses to evacuate the country before its bloodiest battles wash ashore the German seafront. During the time of the war's beginning, Friedrich had begun research into human genomes. He researched what made humans human, long before research on this level could become public common. During the height of his research, he had exercised his connection to the pit to open a gateway to the past, a rip in time before his own birth. This act wasn't something he wished to do often. It had to be considered most secret, of course. Normal people discovering this ability would drastically change the course of history, and those weren't the kinds of changes Friedrich was interested in making. Through the portal, he connected to the year 1917, and called out to a small boy, "You wish for mercy. Let's see if you're willing to earn your keep. I already know your worth. It's time to show your stuff." Friedrich Adada knows of the boy's situation, of course, knows of his specific attitude toward higher powers, and knows exactly how he can get this child to do what he wants. "Hello, Jesse. My name is Friedrich. Do you want to go to space?" And so the boy is intrigued. "So, you can really go to space?" He laughed. "Most in your place would ask how they could get back home to their loved ones. Most don't consider how this could be good for all," Jesse said. "Oh, do explain. I already know your answer, but I'd love to hear you say it." Jesse smiled, for the first time in a long time. "My parents treat me like I'm fragile. My sister loves stories about adventure. I don't care to go to school tomorrow. It's a win, win, win." The smile remained on his face and disappeared briefly after. "All right, works for me. So, here's our plan." And so, Jesse walked through the portal. Friedrich then began to tell him that in order for his trip to space to come true, he would need to wait 20 years, so that he would be there with Friedrich in 1939. Mom and Dad can stay back and watch over the house. They just tell us not to do all the fun things. It's not going to be like that when I grow up. I asked Friedrich. He told me I was going to be much better than that. And then he smiled. I liked it when he smiled. He tells me that I'll be ready to go to space in 20 years. I groaned and moaned as anybody would when told that, but he told me everything about it, which helped the wait, I guess. I'd be getting inside this metal ship that uses explosives to propel itself up to the sky. He tells me that nobody else knows about it yet, so I shouldn't tell anybody about it. I asked him if I could tell you, and he said it was fine, because you come from a time where people already know about it. I didn't get what he meant, but I shrugged it off and assumed you know what he meant more than I do. Jesse would then prepare back in his home life, with Friedrich available through the portal that would appear whenever he needed him, and he swears himself to secrecy as to not ruin the chances of him going to space. At night, Jesse begins to dream of creatures he's never seen. They seem to be speaking languages he doesn't understand, and all seem to be cloaked in shadow. By the time 1939 comes around for Jesse, he did end up meeting with Friedrich in his research lab, just as he'd promised all those years ago. Now, 33, Jesse was no longer a small child, but a grown man who had to deal with the consequences of the choices taken in his life. I've spent my life researching things far beyond those around me, and I have to this point dedicated my entire existence toward furthering advancements into space. And now I was to give it all up. There was something Friedrich didn't initially tell me about my trip to space, something that anybody wishing to venture out to the out there, as I once called it, should most definitely know. He told me exactly how it would happen. I would breach the atmosphere in our homemade rocket, a term that horribly undervalues the amount of work I put into perfecting this space scub. I lie into the stars. As soon as I left Earth, I would be redirected onto the gravitational orbit of our moon, and would then be pulled away from the moon using my ship's hypernate thrusters to swing myself around and launch myself directly into hyperspace. Technology that wouldn't be discovered for another 300 years, mind you, and thrust my ship straight into a wormhole. He told the plan to me with the straightest of all of his faces. The most normal thing he'd said all day to someone, probably. I, of course, didn't take it the way I think he wanted me to take it. Or maybe I did. He knows everything, of course. How much did I have to act to be outside of his knowledge? Does he know that I'd oppose it? Or even think of being for this plan now just to see if I could one-up him? I'm sure of it. Why all of this? I broke out of my 22-year-long reverie. Never once did I ask that question. My burning desire to see the stars up close and my faith in the man who knew everything blinded me to see what I had been working toward. I had no life, no friends. None of my family ever regarded me outside of necessity. This man, Friedrich, was a knowledgeable face that had a sinister agenda. I understood it finally, and I realized that the faces of the creatures that I'd seen in my childhood nightmares all belonged to this one man. I'd never wanted to admit that the darkness had been so close to me, but here I stand, being told that my life as I know it is gone, and that I must go on and pilot the ship that will most certainly kill me. I can't say no, because I know that it is my destiny to pilot that ship. I have no life to return to, no person within. I'm just a boy who got his eye ripped out inside of an adult's body, with no place to go but further down. And so the only question that I can ask, one that I'm sure he's the only one he's waiting for: why? Your actions here are important, he reassures me. I know it's bullshit, and he knows I know it's bullshit. This is to prepare for another story. A boy named Devin Kempton, who will be born in the years to come. I'm but a prologue. He turns on his heels. Now come, you aren't the only one that's going to be making this trip. Consider yourself half of a prologue. Friedrich then introduces Jesse to the other half of a prologue, Rose Linden. Jesse knew that his life was nearing its end, considering neither Friedrich nor Rose saw it fit to introduce Rose past her name. They loaded into the ship, and Jesse begins to feel uncomfortable. He begins seeing visions, but they aren't of a life he recognizes. I didn't have a moment in my life flashing before my eyes because I had no life to flash. Instead, I saw his life, the boy whose life was predicated on the waste that was my own. It makes a twisted sort of sense, but his was the last that I wanted to see. I started to get angry. Angry at myself, angry at Friedrich, even angry at Rose beside me, who I couldn't notice more than her protruding stomach. Even angry at the budding human inside her body. And then we gravitated toward the moon. I found that the one person I could stay mad at was the one that the anger flowed the easiest to. I was angry with him. That anger flowed through everything that was left of me as we swung around, and it never ceased. I don't know how long we were inside of that ship. It felt like years. I don't know how I would have lived that long if possible, but nothing else seemed to matter. I saw the wormhole before my eyes, and it was the most horrible-looking beauty that I'd ever seen, but it still could not defer the slightest bit of rage from my boiling blood. As the ship passed through, I screamed for the first time in over 20 years. It was the most blood-curdling scream that tore itself at the seams. My body was completely and wholly disintegrated. Our ship split in two. Rose accomplished a great feat for a man, but one not a surprise to Friedrich. She landed on an uncharted planet in a far-off galaxy, where she would soon give birth to a healthy baby boy. His name doesn't matter, and Rose wouldn't matter in the long run, because the both of them would be renamed by history as Adam and Eve, by some cruel reference to the origin of a completely new species on a planet that hid its sun like a prized commodity. Of course, this planet would be known as Tetros in the Black Eye Galaxy, and Eve would raise her Adam to grow up to be healthy using the various sources of food and shelter across the empty planet. What happened to me was much less of an easy story. We'll return to Jesse and the result of Rose's trip out into space much later, but first we must return back to Friedrich on Earth, but we're going to speed along to 1950. Friedrich has returned to Germany after the end of the war. I do want to make an important note here that the way time plays out in this universe is different than ours, as World War II actually ends with the United Kingdom coming out as the clear victor as the world superpower. This will come up later, but is important as background information for now. Friedrich sits on an abandoned bus, for he has an appointment with someone from the future who is connecting to this point in time now, similar to how he connected back to Jesse almost 11 years prior. Friedrich shows his guest around the ruins of Weimar, the beggars of those that struggled to survive after the war's devastation and ensuing reparations. He talks about his successes in reaching space before anybody else, the secret he keeps from all else. It was a one-man journey, and I saw the takeoff myself. To think, a man in the world beyond. It was done with complete and utter silence, and I'm one of 3 people alive who know of this event. Our correspondent, who shall remain anonymous, found interesting things up there. That is where my research truly began. Friedrich then returns to the flat he's transformed into his new laboratory. Something unassuming from the outside, but inside hosts his new project, the Human Genome Project, otherwise called the Schroeder Experiment. Friedrich had since been renowned for his work on human biology, and as such amassed a collection of 10 notable scientists across the globe for his biggest project. Friedrich walks into the laboratory to find 10 prison cells where the test subjects were locked up when not being actively tested on. I walk across the room, my footstep echoing off the walls. I turn and open the hard metal door. Inside is a small room that is not unlike a prison cell in looks. A metal bench is chained to the wall, hanging. A lone stool sits in the corner of the room, and on it is the hunched body of Ken Schroeder. He's wearing nothing but his undergarments and smells absolutely rancid. If I'd taken a quick look at him, I'd have assumed him deceased. But he stirs. He sits up and inhales deeply. What? He screams, his eyes darting around the room. Why, hello, Ken. Air! I smile and walk over to him. The reason Ken and all the other scientists are in here is one reason, simply. I've run out of chromosomes to test on, and it isn't like there's a supply for people to readily take in or test on. So I gathered some of the smartest minds across Europe and Asia, and I began to study their genes. I've kept them down here, against their will, I will admit. Of course, they wouldn't have agreed for the tests if I'd asked, Ken specifically. I would perform tests on him while he slept. I'd keep him down using sedatives, and then I took live samples through very, very invasive surgery. He's mainly okay. His mind is a little messed up, though. Ken twitches slightly, and looks over to me and then down to his little brown notebook beside his bed. I know what that little book will do to me in the times coming. Ken's son Casey will use it to prove my guilt in a court of law, and bring me to my demise. I'm not going to stop it, though. Those who can see the future are gifted, and those who wish to change it are fools. My time for this world was never infinite. My job still needs doing, and that job is keeping this world going until it can no longer go. Interrupting the young scientist's crazy scrawlings would surely go against the plan. Friedrich then confirms the death of another of his test subjects, Natasha, a Russian scientist who died choking on her own bodily fluids. She wasn't showing positive signs of mutation, so she was merely a result of the process. He confirms that each of them are destined to die in these cells, except for one survivor, a German scientist named Sonja von Kleist. She was only 10 when the Second War begun, and her family had the luck of leaving the country before things got bad, just like he had. Although her fortune soon led to her misfortune, as being part of this experiment was her fate. Now she was 21, and her brain had adjusted to the tests and new living adjustments. It doesn't matter to me. I know she lives past me, so her well-being now only gives credence to her survival. I need her for later, and she'll keep this ball rolling. Sonja cranes her head and gives an expectant look towards me. You took a little longer than expected, she said, letting her head fall back onto the wall behind her. You don't seem the least bit surprised to see me, I reply. Of course not. You said you'd be back, and here you are. You are many things, Friedrich Adada, but a liar you are not. She is correct. I may have done my fair share of questionable actions in the past, and present, and future. One thing I can claim, too, is I've never lied. I know how everything goes. Why lie about it? I also happen to know when I'm being lied to, of course, knowing all of this. Are you here to do more tests on me, Doctor? Going to rip my heart out again? Once was enough, and I'm sure you know why I'm here. Or can at least guess, I ask. The others are gone, aren't they? Ken was the last to go, just before I came in here. He lasted longer than I thought. You may be wondering how Sonja is so calm throughout all of this, how she was able to survive for so long with no brain damage at all. The answer is simple. I made it so she could. Her testing was different from the rest. She's barely even human anymore. Her thoughts are hers, but they're mine too. Her will is hers, but it is mine too. She is an organic synthetic, but also a synthetic organic. She is a lovely little paradox which continues to live and not be alive all at the same time. All of this because of my study. My chromosome research led to the development of custom synthetic human organs and systems. That's what the other 9 subjects were for. They provided me with the extra cells to test on and use for my most perfect creation, my own creature. New blood, new insides, none of the unnecessary human weaknesses like the heart or the lungs or anything else that can fail. All that remains is the ever-growing chromosomes powering the suit of electronic connections. She is like a monitor, and the server is being run directly by me. Of course, her skin shall age like any other, and she'll have the look of an elder, but her insides shall be as good as they ever were. Why don't we get out of here? I'm sure we have so much to talk about, I say. Why, of course. I'd do anything for you, Friedrich, Sonia says, a wink on her face. Now, like with Jesse, we're going to be checking back with these two later on, as we have another factor of the story to move over to. We're going to meet a small boy named Larry George in the year 1971. In 1971, a small boy named Larry George celebrated his 5th birthday with his twin brother Stephen. Larry lived in Greenbush, New York, with their parents Teresa and Gilbert George, and the twins' older sister Heather George. The George household was not well off, but they were able to get presents for both of their growing boys. Presents that, as presents to small children do, begin to warp their interests and personalities around. Young Stephen received his father's baseball glove, and Larry received a small black box. It had been a tape recorder. When the birthday celebrations were over, Larry turned the tape recorder on, put on the headphones that came with it, and listened to the tape. But what played back for Larry wasn't music, but instead was a voice calling out to him. Hello? Hello? Larry asked out loud. Stephen turned to face Larry, a confused look on his face. What? No, I didn't mean you, Larry said. I was talking to, Talking to who? Got an imaginary friend? I think, Larry said, equally confused. Huh, that's cool, Stephen said, and was instantly bored of the topic. There's no need to speak so loud. I can hear you just fine from in here, said the voice. It had an airy quality, like it was uttered by a spirit of the wind. I am here for a very important purpose. I am here to be your guide. Guide? Larry thought, looking back out to Stephen to judge if the sound was spilling out from his headphones. It still sounded so surreal that they were talking to someone trapped in the tape. Stephen, lost in his own world, surely wasn't making any sounds. He would pull a prank like this, but he isn't doing it. He pulled the blanket over his knees and crawled into the darkness. Who are you? I am not sure. I just know that I am supposed to be a guide. Will you help me? Can I help you? Help me? I don't think I need help. Larry thought back to the voice, and then he thought on it more. Was there anything he needed help with? He closed his eyes and then thought up to the starry sky, and he knew sometimes his mom and dad were sad. They never told the boys what they were sad about, but sometimes he saw the looks when they tried to hide them. He wasn't sure what they were so sad over. Are you a friend? I want to be. I want to help. Okay, I'll be your friend. I guess I could use some help. What do I have to do? Larry thought it was odd at first, but came to understand that this must be the reason his father gave him this present. Maybe this was his father's way of telling him that he and his mom were sad? Like in offering to help them out, but if that were the case, why couldn't they just speak to the guide and help themselves? It wasn't that he wouldn't do it, he was just confused on a great many things. Fortunately, since Larry was only 5 years old, these concerns lasted the entirety of 12 seconds. When he was downstairs, he was initially jealous of Stephen's present. He thought it looked a lot more practical. You could do a lot of things with a ball and glove. Lots of activities outside would be played with a ball and a glove. By comparison, the cassette player had seemed dull. But now, just like the concerns that bore over him, those feelings washed away as if they had never existed. He can play with the ball all he wants, but he didn't get a friend for his birthday. I need just one thing. I need to make a bond. I don't want to lose you. Why would you lose me? I'm scared. I had a friend once before, and I lost them. It makes me so sad. Well, I don't want to lose you either. What do I need to do? I want to know your name. Once I know your name, I'll tell you mine, and that will be it. Then we'll be all set. That was it? Larry was almost scared over the word bond. In truth, he hadn't known what it meant. It almost sounded scary, but if they were just exchanging names, then he'd definitely want to bond with other kids as well. Oh, well, my name's Larry. Larry, do you accept me as your friend? Your guide to life? Sure. What's your name? You can call me Cappy. Cappy? Alright, it's a bit of a strange name. I like it, though. Reminds me of a baseball cap. There's one more thing, Larry, that I need to ask of you. Larry struck up another confused look. He looked around his mini blanket fort, waiting for the rumbling sounds of the cars outside to cease. They were always so loud. I wish Mom could go turn them off. What is that? I need you to listen to my advice. If I'm going to be your guide, it comes with giving advice. Sound fair? Yeah, sounds fair to me. Good. The first piece of advice is to get some sleep. Nothing good comes from staying up all night. Aw, but it's not even all that late, and the cars outside are still so loud. Larry, the cars outside will not bother you once you fall asleep. I promise you that. It will be very... Cappy seemed to hesitate on the word choice. You need to be able to listen when I give you advice. I am only looking out for what is best for you. The voice that introduced itself as Cappy, in fact, has some history on this planet before 1971. I try to keep some sense of order as the early 1900s have a lot of moving parts, and I wanted to keep some room for the Jesse Anderson Friedrich Adada plotlines to let them breathe. I will now begin to cover Cappy's history up to this point in the story. It was late in the summer of 1903 when a meteor crashed into a southern Kentucky grasslands near a farm owned by an old man named Theodore Bagg. Inside the crater, a protoplasmic specimen crawled on gooey appendages before shifting its appearance to that of a human infant before being discovered by a man. Confused of the child's origin, his hospitable side took him to take the child in, caring for it as if it were his own. The infant aged slower than a normal human. After 25 years of caring for the child, the farmer passed away, and the creature looked like that of a 15-year-old. It had no gender, and no name which it was called. The farmer had only referred to it as you. Once the farmer passed, you stayed in the farmhouse, as it was the only home it had known on Earth. It was able to stay here until one of the farmer's exporters, confused at the mysterious cease of shipment, arrived to investigate. The exporter discovered the farmer's corpse, and the creature he believed responsible for the act. The farmer never made public knowledge of the existence of the child, so the exporter believed that the creature had murdered the old man to take his home. He confronted you, accusing it of murder and theft of the man's home, which caused the creature to become upset. The exporter called the police and drove the creature out of the old man's home. For the next 11 years, you would live off the streets and on the run, only visibly aging about 4 years in that time. During its experiences with the Great Depression, you learned how to deal with sorrow and how to survive on the smallest amounts of food. As Germany invaded Poland in 1939, you took notice of savagery of the German Blitzkrieg. It sympathized with those they terrorized. It listened to a lot of blues around that time, concocting a new identity based on one of its favorite singers, Alonzo Johnson. It shifted its physical appearance to be more masculine and enlisted in the army, remembering the stories that the farmer had told about his time in the war. It was put on reserve under the alias of Alonzo Johnson. It succeeded in its training to join the United States Third Army. It was sent to clean up Germany in the invasion that took place in 1945. It acted differently in combat as it was trained, as it didn't care about protecting its fellow soldiers. It instead focused on defending those who couldn't defend themselves, such as with the Polish and German Jews who were stolen away into the concentration camps. You saw the war through to its end. It witnessed the trials of the German soldiers in the aftermath of all of the fighting. Yu's sense of justice over humanity waned as it came to terms with the atrocity of the war crimes that these humans could inflict on one another. As Yu dedicated itself to rebuilding the lives of those destroyed by the war, it saw that the victims it tried to help also carried darkness within. cries of revenge and bloodlust were common whispers that traveled through the night. During this time, you began to fully understand human nature. It only served to wrong and hurt one another, rather than to live and coexist. It was also during this time that the creature discovered its ability to project its voice through certain human electronics, but only devices that the creatures personally touched could be made into a channel for it to communicate through. It spent its time through the second half of the 1940s and all of the 1950s creating 95 different channels through which it could communicate through. You decided that if humanity was willing to fight itself to extinction, it would stop fighting it, and instead, it would be its guide to the bitter end. It had sent the channels it created to guide certain individuals to turn the tide of the planet. Unfortunately, the first listeners of used devices did not last longer than 3 months without ending their lives. Disturbed, you had been shocked to learn that the human mind was quite more fragile than it initially believed. Most people that listened to you ended up dead sooner rather than later. And then one of its channels came into possession of a small boy in Greenbush, New York. Larry falls asleep to his new friend's advice and dreams of farm animals and all sorts. A fact that disturbs Cappy, but one that seems to signal that this could be the connection he hoped for. He started off small by advising Larry to thank his parents for the gift he had received, and letting Larry know that since he'd forged a bond with him, only he could hear his voice. A few weeks then passed by as the two boys began for kindergarten, and Heather got ready for her first day of the 3rd grade. In his new environment, Stephen adjusts relatively easily, being the more social of the two boys, whereas Larry faces more difficulty, turning to Cappy for help. Larry's teacher begins asking him to put away his present, and to this Cappy bids him to stand up to authority, and that just because they're authority does not mean they're right. Later, at home after Larry's parents were called, and he was inevitably scolded for his insubordination, Larry convenes with his new friend. What you did today was learn firsthand that authority isn't the end. They aren't always in control of you. Sometimes you need to stand your ground to them. But it was just wearing a pair of headphones. Today, yes, but there may be some day where this piece of advice comes singing back to you, and you really need it. You never know when the formative years of your childhood will come back to you later in life exactly when you need it. There will be times this may get you in trouble. Today could have ended up differently with you being sent home. That is the risk of the world. I am instilling the building blocks in hopes that it shall be useful. I see. Larry looked up to the ceiling in the dark. He really didn't see, but if Cappy had said so, he must have had his reasons. He sighed and rested his head on his arm. I just wish I could be better at talking to people. I know, Larry. I know. This is something that shall get easier with time. I promise. We're going to pause with Larry's story for now, as we need to wait a few years before we catch back up with him. We are going to be moving ahead 3 years for some new faces, and then some old. Next up, we're going to travel across the country to San Diego in the year 1974 to visit 2 children who are laughing gleefully. Their faces are blurred as the fogginess of memory hides their identities. They look to be about 12 years old. The boy is swinging on a children's swing set with the girl pushing him from behind. Their faces start to fill in as their voices begin to fill the space. Higher, Devin, higher! The girl's voice calls out. We gotta go as high as possible to reach space. Mission Command needs to go higher! I'm trying! The voice belonging to Devin replies back. The girl sees him kick his back legs out from under him and flies out of the swing. He reaches his hands out as if reaching for the clouds. Unfortunately, he ends up falling back toward the earth, and you hear something precious break. It was his leg. Aw, come on, Devin! Astronauts can't travel to space with a broken leg! Come on, now what do we do if we get hurt? He stops crying for a moment to look up at the girl. He was trying really hard to keep up from bursting again. We get back, he says, sitting up, but it was too much. Ah, Alex, it hurts! He burst back into his loud wail. Come on, Devin, my mom's gonna hear you, and we won't be able to go to space anymore. Alex says, her voice is strained. A few weeks pass, and the two children have played hooky to visit the library. It was clear the two children couldn't be older than 12. They have each gathered books of all sorts of various topics relating to space, and the travels as such. It is clear they have a massive interest in the subject. All the other ones on the shelves were too confusing for me, Devin's voice called out, bringing Alex back to focus on the memory. What book did you get? The Martian Chronicles? Dev, that's science fiction. That won't help us get to space. I told you there wasn't anything else I could understand, he says, prompting a hushing sound from the librarian, reading a magazine at the other end of the room. An older man peeks out from his book and stares at Alex and Devin, then returns to his reading. What do you have there? Devin asks. It's a book on space and time, at least what I think. How are you going to understand that? I don't know, just thought something this big would help. It looks like a smart book, and that's how people get to space, right? They're smart. You have to be able to understand it first, dummy. This is a stupid idea. We shouldn't have skipped school for this. Come on, Alex, you can't give up that easily. Your parents haven't been the same since they lost your sister. Don't you want to find her? Find out who she is? Of course I do. Well then, come on, put that stupid book away and let's go find a better one. Excuse me. They see the man in the corner look up from the book once more. I seem to have overheard your conversation, and it piqued my interest. You two are interested in heading to space? Devin's eyes lit up at the recognition. Oh boy, yes! Come on, Devin, we don't know this guy, Alex says. It's to look for your sister, right? Forgive me my intrusion, but how did she manage to make it all the way up there? I'm a science professor, so I happen to know a little bit about space, and I'm just curious. See, Alex, this could actually be way better than looking at those dinky books. Maybe you could ask this guy about it. I don't like this. Come on, let's just ask him some stuff. Something wrong with that, right? Maybe he can even help us if we tell him about it, okay? Guess so. So you see, Devin begins, Alex here is gonna have a sister. That is until one day they lost her. I don't think we were supposed to know then, but we mistook it for something else entirely. This was a few years ago. Is there something special with that period of time? He asks. If it had been that long, why wouldn't they have found her by now? A flash of recognition passes in the man's eyes. Oh, I'm sorry. I seem to have mistaken. I mean, Alex's parents haven't so much as talked about it since it happened. I mean, I know it's bad to lose a kid, but they've gone completely silent about it. So, we've been thinking, where could a kid go if they got lost? Where would be the perfect hiding spot if you never wanted to be found? Space! Devin cut in. The man was silent. So, you see, we've been trying to find out anything and everything we can to get to space. Maybe if we can find a way to get there, we can find out where Alex's sister is. I see. And so that is why you were searching through those books on space, the man says. Yeah, he quietly replies. Can you help us? You're a professor of science, right? What do you know about space? And so the man introduced himself as Noah Marshall, and suggested they stop by his Sunday school classes. They'd be much interested to learn about the world and such topics like space. This enthralled Devin, and at his excitement, Alex would soon join along. Also in 1974, Gregory Daniels is born to two parents in upstate New York. 1 year later, in an undisclosed location, Friedrich Adada and Sonja von Kleist gave birth to a baby boy, and Friedrich names him Jack. As a child of the father and the world's first automaton, he would have complications in life due to the level of dark matter inside his system. And then in 1975, Mason Radica is also born in upstate New York. These two, among others that have yet to be born, will be very important for the Radical-9 saga, so I want to make note of them here. Now we're going to head back to San Diego for a few years later. Alex and Devin surely have learned the mistake of their logic concerning traveling to space with time, but visiting Mr. Marshall's classes did remain something the pair would do together. Albeit for a time their schedules didn't align, so they had taken opposite classes with Mr. Marshall. And now we're here in 1978. I don't know what to do, Dev. For so long, I thought she was invincible, Alex says, her voice is shaking. Hey, it's okay, dude. Cancer sucks, but she'll get through it. She's your mom. I know how much she's been through and how much as you have. The pneumonia, the miscarriage, the suicide attempt, and even whatever happened before I knew you. Listen, she's gonna get through this, he says, pulling her closer. I can't lose her. When my dad died last year, she absolutely lost everything that made her shine. Dev, I can't lose her too. Alex started to break, with tears running down the side of her face. Hey, come on, okay, you know what? Let's go see Mr. Marshall then. We can see if he has anything to help, Devin says. Okay, I think I could use it. I haven't seen him all this week. You said you were going to go on Wednesday. I know, but I've been so busy with my mom and school and everything. Well, we're going to go, and we'll see if I can't switch back into your session. That way, if we go together, you might have more motivation for it. Mr. Marshall runs his classes out of his large manor, and his house has teachings for those of all ages. The two join in on a session unfamiliar to both of them, and they are welcomed with open arms. They begin by reciting prayer, led by Noah Marshall himself. In each and every one of us that spirit dwells, yet it is not our spirit. It is a fragment of a spirit that came from heaven's gate. And since we are not whole, our whole lives go out to searching for the rest of those fragments. My children, do not end up like the millions of others who waste their lives to never find their fragments here on Earth. I shall not waste my time, the chorus answers. To find our fragments, we must wait for our time to ascend beyond human. It is in the beyond that we find our true selves. Now today we also speak on the topic of our vessels. They are nothing but, and as such we treat them with respect, as they are only ours for a short time. Of course, this isn't speaking for accidents, but this message is one of the most important for you to keep close. Under no circumstances should you intentionally harm your own body. If you are expected to ride out our journey to the very end, then we must keep our vessels in top condition. This includes suicide, of course, for that is a direct refusal of the next level. Now, from this point, a woman enters the scene and begins the next part of the session. A systemic sacrifice of a personal belonging. Now, if you're getting cult vibes, good. You're supposed to be getting cult vibes. Noah Marshall is running a social community that mirrors the Heaven's Gate cult from our world, and he's preparing his acolytes' vessels so they may transcend their reality to ascend to the next level. Now, we're going to put a pin in the story of Alex, Devin, and Noah Marshall as we return to Larry's story as it picks up 2 years later in 1980, and also a few more faces for the modern day of the Radical-9 saga. Stephen and Larry woke up around the same time that Heather's acceptance letter to Yale arrived to the George household. Their parents were ecstatic, but they were also troubled by the thoughts of their first child going away to college so soon. Both Gilbert and Teresa were sucked into a workforce just after high school to make ends meet. They had no personal experience of what higher education could offer their daughter, and they would be lying if they said they weren't immensely grateful for the scholarship she'd earned. Larry's guide was still with him after all of this time, nudging his direction and being his one person to talk to when it all came down. He was thankful for Cappy, not knowing what he would have done without him. Larry's grown up since he was a small boy. He didn't carry around his headphones everywhere anymore. He has his own sort of courage within him, even if it wasn't quite at his brother and sister's levels yet. He did choose to speak with his friend at least once every night. Things weren't all good, however. His grades slipped the first half of the year, C's and D's replacing the B's of old, and his father most of all didn't know how to process that fact. Both Heather and Stephen were getting fantastic grades, sure. Stephen would slip once in a while and get a C on a test, but he usually brought it back up by the end of the quarter. Gilbert didn't know how to deal with the sudden slip of one of his kids, when up to this point, things were doing just fine. There was a mistake somewhere along the way, and he couldn't bear to think that he had anything to do with it. His other two children were doing so great, so it had to be with Larry specifically. Things came to a boiling point during Christmas break when Larry's boy grades had angered Larry's father to the point where he'd stomped into his room and broken one of Larry's records. Don't let your grades get you down. There's always a chance to raise them, his sister Heather said. I just don't think it's fair. You and Stevie are treated so much differently than me, just because of some stupid tests. Larry crossed his arms looking at her. His heart is in the right place, Larry. He knows that your grades are important. They decide your future, she said, looking down. I don't see how numbers on a piece of paper can tell me how smart I am or how successful I'm gonna be. I didn't either, Larry, but look where I am. I just did my work and now I'm going to college in a few months. She tried for a reassuring smile, but he quickly changed course. I know you can pick up to at least a B. You're a smart kid. I'll replace the record and add one more onto that fact tomorrow when we get out of school. But you gotta apply yourself. Sound fair? Larry groaned, but he complied. He already knew that numbers don't define him, and Cappy told him as much as that 2 years ago. And I want to mention that during this time, another important figure is born in 1980 in the Denver, Colorado area, being Jay Ryan. Now back to Larry. His grades continue to slip as the school year continues. He's been seeing his school counselor more, and who often recommends a doctor for Larry to speak to. Gilbert got frustrated with this. My son has told me for this for years that some friend lives in this damn cassette player. I should have never gotten it for him. He threw his arms in the air, looked aside, and shook his head. What do we do to fix him? We must stop this before it gets too deep. His mind was wrapped around the idea of music. This unhealthy association. Now, it was impossible to remove music from his life, obviously, but he cannot have any memorabilia. Any of that reinforces that grip it has on his life. Dr. Abbott mentioned. His bushy eyebrows bent down and his beady eyes stared at both Gilbert and Teresa. Oh, we can't take it away from him, Teresa said, her eyes wandering around Dr. Abbott's office. Larry sat back in the office with a hastily marked 1 on the door. He never liked this place. He called the doctor a quack and a half. He was 100% that Dr. Abbott wasn't a licensed doctor in any way, shape, or form, but he knew that he was the only person his parents would be able to afford. He sat in the room, sat away in an effort to keep his discussion with his parents private, although the good doctor was quite a loud speaker naturally, so the flow of conversation from his end was at least audible. He didn't know what to feel inside. You baby him, Gilbert said, making a sort of sound at the end that sounded like a spat. It was suffice to say that Gilbert was up to his shoulders in stress over the whole situation, and desired to see the end of it immediately. I care about him, Gil. If you do, then you must let him grow without it. You will keep lashing out because all of this crazy, rebellious music these kids listen to. It isn't good for them. Dr. Abbott spat himself, craning his neck, cracking it loudly. They have no respect in that gobbledygook ain't helping them one bit. They're kids like Lawrence that take it to the next level. If this continues, I'm afraid to say he might go out and kill someone. Teresa gasped. Gilbert shook his head and crossed his arms, letting out a deep breath. Got it, Doc. We'll take care of it right, dear. He looked off to her. Yes. Same time next week? Gilbert asked Dr. Abbott. A crooked smile crossed his face, teeth missing and darkness filled the gaps. Sure thing, Mr. George. I do wish to hear how the treatment handles good Lawrence. Larry didn't adjust to the treatment well. It was an obvious fact to anybody involved that would have been an inevitability. As soon as they got home, Gilbert hobbled up toward Larry and Stephen's room. Larry, knowing what was going on from his eavesdropping, ran up the stairs after his father. Dad, you can't do this! It's my stuff! To Gilbert George, all of Larry's things were his things. He provided the roof he lived under, and so until he was 18, and out of that damn door, he was going to have to deal with it. Gilbert then destroys all of Larry's records, and then moves to confiscate Larry's cassette player. This here is an immensely chaotic moment that completely severs Larry's trust in the parental unit, and something he's fully not wanting to go through with. This causes unrest in the George home for the rest of the day, as everyone is on edge from the altercation. Stephen even temporarily rooms with Heather to avoid the tension emanating from his brother. However, not all is off, as a few minutes later, a despondent Larry finds the cassette player back in his pants pocket, and discovers that Cappy had somehow found his way back to Larry. What is going on? He asked aloud before he could think any more. He unwrapped the headphones and plugged them into the cassette player. Cappy, are you there? Hello, Larry. Oh, Cappy, thank God. I thought my dad broke you. I saw him throw you out. He did because of that doctor who told him to. I have a bond with you, Larry. So if that means I'll always find my way back to you. I'm supposed to be your guide. How do you do that? I mean, the cassette player should be broken, though. How it happens is another story for a future day. I'd love to tell you that one in person. In person? You're actually someone out there in the world? Larry asked. Yes, everybody is someone out there in the world. Guess I'd never really thought about it. I sort of thought you'd be like a ghost or something. I am no ghost, Larry, but we both know that at the current moment the only thing dead here are those records of yours. Larry sat back in his bed and groaned, letting out his entire chest worth of breath. God, it sucks so bad. You can't let him crush your dreams, Larry. You love music. I know Cappy, but he's my dad. Without him, I wouldn't have met you. Yes, I understand that you love him, but you must also love yourself. Here's what I think. You should go out and get a guitar. A guitar? I don't have that kind of money. Besides, my dad would probably just smash like all my records. I can help you with that, Larry. Don't you worry. How are you gonna do that? Larry asked, but Cappy didn't reply. He was left to himself for the rest of the night, and so he took in a deep breath and rested his head against the pillow. So many things in his life were out of his control, but Cappy seemed to be the one thing that was very much the opposite. Someone who knew what to say to get him feeling more at ease. He dreamt of many things that night. His father, his records, but the prevailing image that came to him was a starry night sky. He dreamt of sailing across the stars and wondered what kind of music they liked down there. He wondered if he would someday get to go to space to know. Speaking of traveling to space, we're going to be shifting back over to 1982 to meet back with Alex. She has a private meeting with Noah Marshall. She's 19 at this point, and based on her responses to Mr. Marshall, it is clear that years of sorrow have harrowed her experience. She's proverbially drank the Kool-Aid at this point. When a student turns 19, their earthly body is seen as complete, as a vehicle to the next level. That is the minimum age requirement you to handle the full ascension process, but it's not the only requirement. Of course, all of what I've told you and shown you up to this point has been in help for you to see the beyond, to see what we can become. All of that is useless if your body can't make the trip. I've shared this information with Dante a few years back, since his body was getting old, almost too old for Ascension, but he was lucky. He made it in time, and now he'll be joining us for Ascension, whenever the call is made. Sherry became ready on her 19th birthday almost 3 years ago now, and now it's your turn. I must plant my seed within you, that my body as the chosen progenitor of the next level shall all our spirits ascend. Larry is now a high school junior, and his grades have since picked up considerably. Mysteriously, the George family household received a package, supposedly signed by Dr. Abbott, containing an acoustic guitar inside with specific instructions for Larry to take up making music to satisfy his fixations. A note beguiled by Gilbert George, but after speaking with Teresa, he relented. Coincidentally, after this note and present arrived, Dr. Abbott went missing, and had never been seen from again. Larry's rising grades and the disappearance of his therapist both gone hand in hand for him to no longer seeing one. A fact that had eased Gilbert George and lightened the tension on the George household. During junior prom, Stephen easily found a date, and Larry had stayed more in the background, Cappy telling him not to worry if he doesn't find a date, that things will inevitably work out. At the prom, Larry meets with another socially outcasted student named Stanley Tix, or Sticks for short. He bonded quickly with Sticks, and was eventually invited to come hang with some of his friends, and eventually join the garage band. Larry found himself at Sticks' trailer after the school the next day, and was introduced to the rest of the band, Rosewood. Paul Polly Knox ran the drums, Thomas Tommy Boy Bentham on lead guitar, Marianne Wilhelm on lead vocals, with Sticks himself on bass. Larry begins to form a crush on Marianne, but notices that she seems to be involved with Polly, bringing forth a dilemma as they take Larry on as the rhythm guitarist. This year is when things started to shift for both George brothers, as Larry's grades would continue to stay consistent from this point on, and he would find his own niche with the school band. But Stephen, on the other hand, would begin to slip from honor roll, and his parents would discover a stash of LSD he received from his prom date, Lainey Delarue. This would lead to an increase in calls home for the rest of their junior year. In September of 1982, David Kress would be born in Aurora, Colorado. We next see the George brothers on their graduation day in 1983. The whole George family was in attendance of their overly sunny Saturday afternoon. Larry's grades had never been better than his last quarter of his senior year, and his parents didn't know it, but inside his pocket underneath the robes sat the cassette player with Cappy by his side. Also by his side was Marianne, also dressed for the occasion. It had definitely led to a disgruntled Polly who had not just split from Marianne, but also from Rosewood a few months back due to creative differences. They've also since replaced Polly on drums with one of Styx's neighbors, Kevin Whaley. In the time since Cappy advised Larry to follow his heart and ask Marianne out. The two clicked instantly. They had already been fast friends, so it only made sense that once her relationship with Polly ended, that Larry would fill the role he left. Stephen had managed to graduate, but his grades were lackluster, only coasting on the fact he earned a baseball scholarship at NYU the following year. Both George boys were called up and received their degrees that both of them packed away from their high school memories, eager to move on for the next step of their lives. And that's where we're going to leave it this time. We've covered 80 years of history, and we've got quite a bit of history to go. But we're coming into the front story of the books that we'll be going through the history as we continue forward in the Radical-9 saga. If you like this video, and you want to learn more about this story, you can check out my books for free over on my Royal Road account, which will be linked down in the description. You can also get downloadable ebook versions for them for sale over on my coffee shop, or if you just want to support my art. And lastly, you can also check out the paperback and hardcover versions over on Amazon.